Right, paragraph 6A of the 1 to 4 family contract. In a previous video, we went over what title insurance is. Here, let's just talk about paragraph 6A. At the top here under the title policy, it's saying the seller shall furnish to buyer. So that just means the seller is going to furnish a title policy to the buyer at closing. That doesn't mean they're paying for it. Who's paying for it is determined here. Is the seller paying for it or is the buyer paying for it? Right? Now, whoever's paying for it's going to be negotiated here. If both of these are checked off, that means the title company is going to split the cost between the buyer and the seller for the title policy. Right? Now, another general rule that we follow is whoever's paying the title policy is going to choose the title company. Now, notice it's blank here, so whoever the title company is negotiable between the parties. But typically who's paying for it is going to choose who the title company is. There are exceptions to that rule in the cases of probate and other complicated situations. The seller may have already gotten work done with a title company, preliminary work, so it would be courteous to negotiate it to stay there. Right now, circumstances change. It is negotiable. But if there's already been a bunch of work done by the title company in order to clear title on some issues, then we probably are going to close at that title company. Okay. Now, the second part of this is that the title is going to be issued in the amount of the sales price. So if it's a $300,000 sales price, that's the amount of the title policy. Okay. It'll be dated at or after closing and ensuring the buyer against loss under the provisions of the title policy with some exclusions. So again, the title policy goes into effect at closing. And at that point in time, when they've done the research, that's what it's covering. It doesn't cover things in the future. It covers things that have already happened. Okay. That they've researched. If there are things that show up on the title policy, then those are going to be added as exceptions to coverage. So make sure that the seller or the buyer reads the title policy. And if they have questions, ask the title company. You should also read through that. And if you see anything on there that's questionable, go to your broker, call the title company and ask them to explain that to you. Okay. Now, here's something that you guys need to be aware of, right? Title insurance does not cover existing building codes or zoning ordinances or anything like that. It's covering ownership and ownership of things on the property, right? There's restrictive covenants on the property. That means if there's deed restrictions, title insurance doesn't cover that, right? When you're buying a property subject to deed restrictions, you need to read through the deed restrictions, not you, the seller needs to read through those deed restrictions and make sure there's not anything on there that would be detrimental to what they want to do with the property, right? That might be storing an RV on the property. And these also have to do with HOA rules and regulations, right? If they want to do an addition to the property, deed restrictions might restrict that. So they need to make sure that they read the deed restrictions and read the HOA rules and regulations as well. Okay. Fees and taxes and assessments, they're not going to cover that in paragraph 2. They're not going to cover insure against any liens that are created. So when you get the mortgage to buy the property, there's going to be an exception for that lien on the property, right? Any reservations, they're not going to cover that. Standard printed exceptions as to marital rights. And what that means is Texas is a community property state, so there's going to have an exception on marital rights. Okay, if you don't know what that is, ask. Right? Waters, tidelands, beaches, streams, anything physical that can happen from Mother Nature, title company's not going to cover that. Okay. Now here's one, paragraph 8, that people get confused a lot. So let's talk about this. So the standard printed exception as to discrepancies, conflicts, shortages in area or boundary lines, encroachments or protrusions or overlapping improvements. So the title company is not covering overlapping improvements. They're not covering shortages in area. They're not covering boundary lines. They're not covering discrepancies. They don't insure those things. Now, if the buyer wants additional coverage, they can ask for additional coverage here. Right? So we got to check off, and agents miss this all the time. One of these two boxes have to be checked off. Okay. If they check off 8I, that means it will not be amended, meaning this statement right here is not going to be amended. This statement is going to stay the same. Right? Now, if they want additional coverage, they can mark off 8II, and it will amend to read shortages in area. Now, here's the thing. Now, who's going to pay for that? The buyer or the seller? The cost of this additional coverage is 5%. Today, it's 5% of the total title policy. So if the title policy is $1,000, 5% of $1,000 is $50. It would cost $50 for additional coverage. I think it's for $50, you should get additional coverage, but that's going to be negotiable between the parties, and it's going to be up to the buyer if they want that additional coverage or not. Okay. Now, what does it do? It amends paragraph 8, 6A8 to read shortages in area. So what does that mean? That means the language would state that the title company exception is going to be shortages in area. What that means is the title company is not going to cover if we think we're buying an acre and a half and it's only an acre and a quarter. The title company is not going to make up that difference. The title company does not insure shortages of property. Okay. But it does remove these other things. So it will remove discrepancies, conflicts, boundary lines, encroachments or protrusions, or overlapping improvements. It will insure those things, but it will not insure shortages in area. A lot of agents get that backwards. Okay. The title company will never insure a shortage in acreage or shortage in property size. Okay. If you have questions on that, go see your broker, come see me. Okay. And then number 9, the exception or exclusion regarding minerals approved by the Texas Department of Insurance. Title companies do not cover mineral rights. Make sure that the buyer understands that. This is important when you start buying acreage because the title company does not insure mineral rights. A separate oil and gas attorney or a landman will need to be hired to research the mineral rights that the potential buyer is getting or the buyer potentially is getting. Okay. So that's paragraph 6A. Okay. Questions? Let me know. I hope this is helpful. Let's go on to the next paragraph.